Okay, good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming for the CCT event today. And I would like to welcome Mahesh from Mode, who's come all the way from Chennai for the talk. Of course, thanks also to the pleasant weather, Bombay is experiencing these days. So it's kind of good to see Bombay in this weather. Also, after the long, intensive elective week, I think this is a good way to culminate with this talk. And with that, just allow me to make a couple of points to kind of situate Mode's practice in the terms of what Prem in 1999 coined two terms for two kinds of architectural practices in India. What he called as the architecture of the foreground, which is basically practices based in Bombay, Ahmedabad, Delhi, versus the southern practices or practices from South India, where he saw them as practices that kind of believed in being the background, not interested in larger theoretical manifestos or bigger ideas, but were interested in kind of resolving one project at a time nicely. And in 2007, he changes that position to say that, well, perhaps even in South, like especially speaking from Bangalore, he thought that there were some practices which were carrying the legacy of the architecture of the background. One can think of 100 Hands, maybe even Sanjay Mohe, who started his office in 2004, Ochre Architects, many to kind of list. But he said that in 2007, this is also a transition where certain architects are taking the position of coming to the foreground again, like who believe in grand theories and bigger manifestos to kind of operate their practices from. And I was thinking how to position Mode's practice in those two terminologies. And I think what I found interesting, and especially when I heard Mahesh present at Avni Institute in September, is that Mode's practice perhaps is an interesting evolution between the foreground and the background. It's kind of oscillating between these two positions, where while it is interested in kind of larger narratives that are shaping the contemporary urban conditions that we're living in, it is also at the same time and fascinatingly interested in the last minute detail of every project to kind of craft it so well that people can also talk about that thing. And I think with that, I would like to introduce Mahesh and a little bit background about him, and then invite him to give his talk. Two more minutes, please. So Mahesh Radhakrishnan is a founding partner at the Madras Office of Architects and Designers with 20 years of experience in critically understanding city architecture and placemaking. His work is focused on design as a creative response to context and collaboration. Mahesh received his bachelor's degree from NIT Trichy and was a research scholar at Bauhaus Dessau Foundation in Germany. His past work experience includes Adrian McGregor Associates in Sydney, Christopher Charles Benninger in Pune, and CNT in Bangalore. And probably now that I know that he's worked at CNT, probably Prem's influence is inevitable there somehow. He's a visiting faculty and juror at several architecture schools across India. He was a panelist in the Kurlavarki Design Forum in 2016 at CEPT. Mahesh has an active interest in the role of design in society. He is a trustee of Chennai Architecture Foundation, popularly known as CAF, and an associate of Urban Design Collective UDC, both not-for-profit organizations promoting architecture and sustainable urban practices, respectively through advocacy and research. With that, I would like to introduce Mahesh for his talk. Thanks.
I think, Shreya, you summarize my practice better than I would. Thank you to Polly for the invitation and Shreyank for the wonderful introduction, and Anuj, who is not here today for all the planning, meticulous planning that made sure I arrived here on time. So it's always good to be back. If living on a campus of IIT Powai remotely qualifies living in Bombay, then I have lived here. A couple of decades ago. So it's good to be back, and we're also doing a small project here. So enjoy the city. What I'm going to present here is a reading of our work. In the late 2018, almost 10 years since our first project got built, we tried to make sense of what we are doing as a practice. Something to the tune of what Shreyank just mentioned. We were actually addressing, responding to the sort of immediacy of the practice, but we were also kind of thinking about larger ways of applying certain theoretical ideas. So to orient ourselves better, since then, we try to kind of, put our practice, areas of work, what are our concerns, and so on, under these, heads that you will see in a minute. So this presentation has been evolving for the last, year and a half. I keep adding to it. So, I've added a lot of new content to it. So, I hope you bear with the time. So it might not be just 40 minutes or slightly more than 40. Before I start my presentation, I would like to give a bit of background. I come from this city, a city where you cannot separate cinema and politics. And cinema is such a cultural phenomenon that we are so much influenced that many times in our studio to explain concepts, I actually use, like a director explaining, this particular scene in this movie is different from this. Why? Because so and so. So actually, even to explain architectural concepts, we kind of use cinema. And it is also important to talk about the nature of our practice. We are primarily an architecture practice with an extended interest in other forms of spatiality. We do a variety of work under these, heads. If you're wondering what the shades of gray are, I think the grayest ones give us some money and the others don't. So we kind of, feed off this way. So that's what happens. And for us, we can't live without it also. I mean, it's a kind of a stupid way to kind of run a business, but we can't live without it either. So and it kind of feeds off each other. So the title of my talk is Evolving Preoccupations. Let me sort of unpack why this title and what is evolving and why preoccupations. For a starter, we do not have a homogeneous ideology. At best, our approach is like driving on the streets of India. You're always aware of the context around you. You strategize. Strategies are immediate and the logic current. You kind of apply a current logic, and our architecture is informed by that. It kind of alternates between a sort of context-sensitive and context-free approach. There's a strong dosage of that in our work that you will see. Some work is like absolutely context-free, but some are like extremely context-sensitive. And you can see both in the same work as well in different proportions. And ours is also an urban practice. We are limited by a lot of stuff. The land, the FSI, the budget. In other words, it is to say that it's highly conflicted and contradictory in nature. Between the brief and the land, there is no relationship. I hope to explain this through our presentation. The scale of projects, variety of contexts, and the positions that are constantly conflicting with each other can be seen in our work. It is through these challenges our projects thrive, and they help us draw meanings to our explorations, and in the hope that our projects give meanings to them. There are sort of broad 4 main recurring preoccupations that have defined our trajectory for the last 10 years or so. First one is on the city. This is our engagement on working with the city. These are essentially collective effort. We as architects are collaborators and facilitators. These are also projects, some of these projects are also initiated by us because we know the context, we know the culture. I think, some things can work there. So we kind of initiate, these projects without a client. And in many cases, the responses, in such projects are also need to be very surgical in nature as they directly respond to an issue. The second one is, in the city, these are primarily projects which are dealt in the private realm with a client, either a private client or a developer, whose point and these projects are, have a points of departure, and in some projects the point of return is the city. Here the city is explored in its physicality, in its memory, and in its iconography. The third one is type. What is a public space? What is a house? What is a shopping mall? These are questions that are part of every single one of our projects. In fact, it is through this we negotiate a project brief, and they in turn tend to define our built envelopes. And the last one is body of architecture. This is a recent preoccupation. Being a very small practice, we found ourselves constantly challenged with making of a building. We were almost doing a project manager's work, or construction manager or supervisor all rolled in one. These projects explore the very core of architecture through materials, and they are the flesh of architecture and enable a bodily experience for the person experiencing it. So I'm going to talk about, these 4 preoccupations with, 2 to 3 examples each. I'll start with this. Urur Kuppam and Chennai schools. Urur Kuppam, this is a work which we did a year ago, and Chennai schools is something which we are currently working on. This project is about reclaiming the commons and right to the city. This is a project about a small fishing village of 1,500 people that is older than the city of Chennai, reeling under the pressures of real estate development simply because it is next to the most preferred upmarket neighborhood in Chennai. So that's the fishing village that we're talking about, and this is the upmarket neighborhood. For people who know a little bit of who know the geography of Chennai, this is the Theosophical Society, and this is the Adyar area. So this is kind of the most upmarket neighborhood, most preferred in Chennai. In order to safeguard this particular village, which is actually older than the city of Chennai, the local Panchayat Secretary, Saravanan, self-taught GIS man, mapped the commons. So this is the village that we saw, and these are all the village commons that he mapped. These are all the various ways in which they use the shores between the water and the land, and the settlement. So it includes places where they kind of do crab fishing, where they do prawn fishing, where they dry their nets. There is one space which is called the Periyavala, which is actually a ritual at the beginning of fishing season, where the entire community kind of goes and fishes. So this entire particular map was done by Saravanan, who is actually the local Panchayat Secretary, and this was a way to kind of reclaim the commons from the city itself, or the legal city. Historically, fishermen were the custodians of the coast. This is a kinship map that shows how the family extended between the villages on the coast. So on the right this is the Urur Kuppam, which is the fishing village. On the right is where all the women from Urur Kuppam got married to. So these are all different fishing villages across the coast of Chennai. So this is close to the Pulicat Lake, which is close to the Andhra border, and this is actually almost close to Mahabalipuram. And one on the left is where all the women from other villages were married to men in Urur Kuppam. So this was kind of this practice ensured that the guardianship of coast remained between the fishing communities living along the coast. You must all have heard about T.M. Krishna, the singer who recently won a Magazine award. A citation mentions that he took Carnatic music out of the sabhas. Sabha is basically an organized congregation, like a club, where they promote and listen to Carnatic music. So this is the first stop, or this is where it all started. It was actually the people from the fishing village who actually invited T.M. Krishna, or in other words, they both collaborated to actually bring the event to this particular village. So it was a way of inviting them. It was a way of inviting the city folks into the informal settlement, or the kuppam, what we call, to kind of through this particular event. So it was also done a way to reclaim their commons through display of their culture, where the city actually participated. We were approached by Saravanan about a couple of years ago, the village Panchayat leader, to look into the issue of sewage along the shores. So, I mean, this was when we started the work, we had no clue where the project is going to, take us to. So the issue was sewage. So many people who work with the informal settlements no, to deny infrastructure is a common tactic by the state to delegitimize right to the city. Urur Kuppam is no different. Lack of data in this context is always the first hurdle. So we went about gathering data. These were, I'm going to show you a list of slides which shows the process that we followed to sort of gather the data. We started a dialogue with the community, conducted door-to-door household surveys, mapped the physical characteristics of the village, and then these data was verified and then digitized. Interestingly, most of these houses don't even have house numbers. From the beginning, it was kind of a hurdle. So we actually gave them house numbers. So from then on, they would actually refer to that as their house number for every meeting that they would attend. Nature of buildings, where they're kacha, pakka, you can see the legend out there. Building heights, toilet infrastructure map, which was primarily what we were there for. What we found was, it was not just the untreated sewage, but many of the households did not even have a piped water connection. So it kind of combined both these, and then, the issue kind of compounded. So this was a men defecation pattern map. Like, when do men defecate, in the mornings, in the evenings. So there was a kind of completely different pattern. And depending on the households, you could see how that, sort of graph. That's the women. And most of the women would actually defecate in the neighbor's house, or they would choose to, go for defecation only before dark and after dark. So that was primarily the sort of, document that we went with took to the authorities, which is to show the wastewater discharge pattern. I mean, roughly about 50 to 60% do not actually have toilets, and it is primarily because of that, all these issues were kind of compounded. We held community meetings to arrive at a sort of proposal. Again, when I say we, it's not just me. There was a collective, urban designers, UDC was part of it. There was actually activists, Vetiver Collective, who actually work with all these. So they are basically environmental activists who work along the shores of Chennai. There were also other agencies who were part of it. And based on our calculations, assuming sort of 90 liter per capita consumption per day, we arrived at a sort of DWAT system. So that's basically the proposal of the project. We came up with a DWAT system. On top, it became a public space, and there was a public toilet for men and women that was added to the commons. This is a project that demonstrates community infrastructure as a public space and helps the village to permanently reclaim their commons from the very infrastructure that was denied to them. So the status of this project is funds were allotted for the project, but it was stuck for some time now, since we did not have any local body elections. For almost 3 years, we did not have any local body elections. So now things have started again. So hopefully, for the community, we hope to see, this project take shape soon. The second on the line is Chennai schools. A typical government school in Chennai looks like this. They are not that bad compared to rural schools. Or we had an intern from Ahmedabad who said they are not bad at all. So what plagues this school is twofold. One is ad hoc construction, and the other one was poor infrastructure. Ad hoc construction, because the toilet block is added by an MLA's fund. Local councillor adds a stage for CM's birthday. Central funding adds a smart classroom. There is no coherent plan, basically. So this results in clutter of space, residual spaces that are not used, that are not maintained, and eventually dumping happens, and things like this. It ends up becoming like this. Poor infrastructure, poor toilet ratios. I think the toilet ratio was roughly about, so there was one WC for like 35 to 40 kids, and the standard is about 20. So roughly about, you need double the number of WCs. Very high student densities and no separate funding for maintenance. So while these are visible issues, which can be these are visible issues which can be fixed by increasing the number of well-designed classrooms and toilets. So this is one of our intervention where that was an existing toilet block for kindergarten kids. And we kind of said, we can do this. I mean, this can be fixed in some sense. If you have the funding and, if it is available at the right time, you can actually get this fixed. But what is invisible is the mental state of these kids. Typical demography of the school children is that they form the lowest strata of society. Many of them raised by single parent or by grandparents or relatives. Their parents are maids, helpers, hawkers, and daily laborers living in the city. Except for few teachers, others really look down upon them. I mean, that's the kind of mental state of the kid. So this particularly leads to vandalism, theft, and extreme hyperactivity. All these kids are like extremely hyper. And at this point, we realize the objective of the project is beyond functional requirements. So how do you then tackle such a situation? So Chennai Corporation was interested in revamping government schools, and as a pilot, we are now given 3 schools to demonstrate the possibilities, how we can tackle this issue. We also know that our approach has to be very surgical in nature, as we have limited means to create most change. Design with limited moves that can change the way the kids perceive the school. So I think a lot is about the perception of the school more than actually the physical infrastructure. So we approach the project like designing in a city like ours, there's hardly anything designed for children. And I'm sure it applies to all our cities. And especially kids from these backgrounds, because I think people in slightly higher strata, you have other places. You go to a mall, you have bowling alleys, there's that. But people from the lowermost strata do not have that option. There's nothing designed for them. And this Chennai school project, seemed to be the right opportunity for us to sort of, work around that idea. I mean, we are still kind of tinkering around it, but I'll just show you some ideas. So we approached the project like designing a public space for children. I mean, we applied all the principles of public space and allowed the principles of public space design to enable these kids to reclaim the space in the city. So actually, when they come into the school, it feels like it's actually for them. So the first thing we did is we kind of so our first move was to kind of remove these grills. The reason why this grill is added is in the earlier days, to avoid drunkards using the place during the after school hours or during Sundays. So they always had the grills. Today they all have CCTVs, security guards. So technically you can get rid of that, and it kind of opens out the place like this. And we also proposed an additional shaded corridor when they didn't have, which they didn't have. So wherever they didn't have, we actually proposed an additional shaded corridor. And what this led to is, this is the existing plan. So this is like a nollie plan, blurring the inside and outside. So this is what happened. So the exterior became, a lot more integrated to the inside. It also, increased the shaded corridor. These are all the shaded areas, where they can conduct different activities. Vertical learning was possible. Kids from one group can interact with the other. And if you look at the section, suddenly, this was all the typical section. Suddenly, all these newer dimensions were possible. New spatial connections were established. Sergei Saladin, I met this man who basically studies urban morphologies and advises cities in the newer developments in China, in apartheid, neighborhoods of Africa. And, he uses, he kind of claimed that, the grid is the most democratic form because it offers maximum choices. And in order to kind of enable that, we kind of connected all these, with bridges. So what was only like, one possibility for the kid to go up and come down suddenly became like he can climb here, go all the way here, come down here. So suddenly the choices became a lot more. And this we hope will kind of make the school more inclusive and cohesive. We proposed a covered. So I think after seeing all this, suddenly the deputy commissioner got very excited. He said, we'll give more fund, do more proposal. So we proposed additional covered multi-use space, and finally, like a typical urban space, we added a landmark. So there was like new facility added, one facility at least in each school, depending on the strength, which is kind of unique to that school. So this is actually a kindergarten in a 3.3 acre campus. They also had, partly amphitheater gallery kind of seating. So we kind of added a roof above. This is actually a school about 1.14 acres, and we added like a first floor, just the first floor, which was extended to add a gallery and a kabaddi arena. And in this school, the stair itself became that sort of active, landmark in each school. So we hope this will bring about a change to the perception of the school, and most importantly, have a positive impact on the child who grows up in these environments. So these are some proposals that we made. Moving on to the second preoccupation, which is in the city. So this is the first project, Shop in a Park. This is a project about create a public space in a private realm. If you're familiar with the geography of Chennai or Tamil Nadu, if you know ECR, East Coast Road, it's one of the most scenic road from Chennai that goes all the way to Pondi and Rameshwaram, and now is extended up to Trivandrum. This is one of the first commercial on that road within the Chennai boundary. The client had dreamt, I use the word dreamt because he dreamt of creating a typical mall with an air-conditioned atrium. So that was the brief that was, given to us. But unfortunately, the approval for that dream was refused because site was on an aquifer recharge area. An aquifer recharge area is where, you need more land so that the water would go in, recharge the water table. So you need, more open space. So eventually they had to divide the land into 6 such blocks, and each one had a separate block. So what was a kind of cohesive atmosphere of a mall suddenly became like 6 blocks. And that was essentially our challenge. How do you kind of, work with that to create a commercial? So first what we did is, we put all the blocks of, if anybody who has worked in a retail environment know that, the interior of a retail environment is more like a mediated experience. You're actually, your experience is less sort of spatial. So we wanted to create that spatial experience, through this project. And the first move we did is to kind of articulate the facades, create some interest to break the monotony. And we knew the blocks need to have a canopy because it was kind of west facing. So, that kind of added the next layer. So our intent was to design a public space. We designed basically a street room. We found this text by Guy Debo that puts the idea more eloquently, and we found this much later. At that time, we called it urban room. The notion of a street room reverses the false distinction of open and closed ambiances. The closed ambience itself opens onto the open ambience, which is demarcated by a closed ambience. Basically, 2 different conditions defining each other. And there it was born, the idea of a shop and a park. So we said, okay, these blocks were shopping blocks. And what if we imagine the space around it as a park? And at that time, it also dawned to us that in order, for this project to be held as one cohesive space, you needed a continuous roof, not, roof that is sort of separated. We did various iterations of the roof. These were different materials. This is a laser cut steel scrap, which we used as a roof. This is, again, laser cut of a different size. This is punched. This is perforated sheet, cut like a canopy, like shadows. And then finally, we ended up with, good old pergolas, as the roof. Once the, direction of the pergolas were decided, then we kind of decided the direction of the paver as well. And that's the project. So this was the first project, commercial project on that stretch. And the moment we, completed this work, we had so many offers. Like everybody had a parcel of land, and they wanted to do something similar. And, and suddenly there were many copies on that street. So these are like 2 such copies. So this guy, in fact, was the first one to come to me. And the moment we gave a quote, he never turned up. And then he had the same canopy, same gray, ground level. And, this was another, which was actually parallelly happening. The moment, we put a canopy, he put his own sort of, trellis stuff. So upon, and what happened is, we ended up having another client who said, we want you to work with us, right? So same 6 plots and same 6 blocks. So we took the idea of street room, created more meandering spaces, so this is the service roads. From here, you create more meandering spaces. And this was the first proposal we gave. And unfortunately, we didn't succeed in our efforts to convince the client. So the client was extremely stubborn. They wanted only a sequel to Shop in a Park. So they were clear. They wanted the same plan. It works for Vastu. Nobody complains. So they just want the same, right? So what we did is we kept everything the same, except that we just added a sort of, in Tamil we call pandal, which is like a sort of tent-ish kind of stuff. And that's all we did. It's the same block. We just added this. And we thought this is a good opportunity to kind of explore the idea of a public art in a private building, because the entire thing is open for you. So we wanted to then work, some kind of a graphic around this place. So what I'm going to show you, the next set of 6 slides, is what we showed the client, except a caveat I'll tell you at the end. So we said, today's religion, consumption, consumption is today's religion. And, temple are today's shopping malls, right? And, so they had frescoes then. And so then you ask what's fresco today? And basically what these frescoes were like, murals were interactive and participative. They were either, preaching something, or it's about conduct, or it's about myth, all kind of bringing you back closer to God, right? So what we did is, we said we will actually work. What is today's God is your products, your iPhones and your, So we made a list of products. We said, okay, we'll just throw them around the ceiling. So we call this the black hole graphic. It's about consumption, an object, a brand, a lifestyle, things that suck you in, objects float in space without reference. So that's what we did. And then you can't actually put it the way it is, because, what if the person, the store below is selling something else? So we had to kind of, work out a graphic around it. And then we said, okay, so these are the line drawings of this. So we said we will put the local flowers, fill it with flowers, make it more sort of, softer. Made a list of flowers and, started filling them out. So, and that's the graphic that kind of came about. It's kind of participating. That's the issue. Once you identify one object, you will start slowly kind of, looking for what's the next. And then this is what we did. And from there to there. And that's the street, and that's the project executed. We are in the final stages. So that's the executed project. And the caveat is we did not show him the black hole. We just said these are flowers of consumption. Right? And they bought it, so I'm happy. So, so the second project or third project in this is a book building. This is one of our first project in Chennai. And in this project, patterns that you see every day in a city is used as an iconography. It was on an extremely, it was for a client who made these, if you know Tara Books, they make these beautiful handmade books. So our client was that. And it was on a tight plot. So this is the book. It was an extremely tight plot with a laundry list of requirements. The building should house a bookstore, small exhibition space, administrative office, editorial, accommodation for visiting artists, like all packed in, in this space, almost like Bombay style. So design was fairly simple. We exploited the bylaw. Like in Chennai, you can either do a stilt plus two, or you can do ground plus one, but you can actually have a mezzanine. So we kind of combined these two bylaws to create the basic organization, and it went from public to private. And since the client was in this sort of visual medium, as architects, what can we do? We were kind of constantly asking this question ourselves. So this is what Tara Book does. They kind of take a traditional or tribal art or a folk art, and then use what we call design to kind of build a new narrative to it. And that's what we tried to do. And we tried to look for what is the equivalent in architecture. So and this kind of steel craft that is kind of prevalent as security grills. We went around documenting grills. In Chennai, there were about 120 which we documented. Some are like as old as I will show you. Like these are like probably buildings in 60s. This is slightly much older. And then we kind of did this collage of grills, which became the sort of image of the place. The making of these grills. We had a fantastic fabricator doing that, and that's what it does when the sun shines. That's the project. We kind of designed the top floor accommodation as almost like a village. We called it the village because like the first story they said is, this place need to have a warmth, because most of their tribal artists, folk artists, when they come to city, they just can't relate to it. So they needed, and this is probably the first place that they'll land up. So we want to kind of evoke that sense. That's the exhibition space. That was, I don't know if it is now, at that time, the largest Gond art by Bajju Sham. I think he won a Padma Shri last year. And that's how the space is. It's kind of, it works with the community. They do workshops. It's kind of open. The ground level is pretty much open. Anybody can just walk in. And the success of the design is, this is on the tote bag of Tara Books, and they use this in the exhibitions. And so I think when we saw this, we were kind of laughing to ourselves, patting us at the back, saying that, yeah, I think you really came close to the ethos of the place. The next set of projects is about typology. We always question, what is a house? You always question an archetype of a house. So the first project, in fact, it was one of the oldest projects that we did. It's called Shiloh House. It's a fantastic site in Calicut. The client was an expat, and they wanted an expat from US. So they always wanted a sprawling house, right? And the wife was from Chennai. So the recent memory of tsunami, she wanted the house to be, lifted up. And they also wanted to use the floor below. They were Christians, so they wanted to use the floor below for prayers and stuff. And like every typical Mallu, they wanted a red tile roof, right? So that was the preliminary sketch, and that's how it kind of took shape. I said, I will give you all that you ask, but I will give it in the way we want to give it to you. So that's how it kind of panned out. And this was the initial model that we sent. Actually, after we sent this presentation, they never got back to us for like a month. And after a month, we got a call saying that we didn't understand what you had actually sent, but we are actually coming to Chennai and we would like to sit across the table and help you explain what you have done. And luckily, they bought the idea. We went up to the approval stage, and that's when fate has it. There was this market crash in 2008. So the client developed cold feet, and then came our next project. I'll just talk about that in a minute. And then came Kochivide. So, is there any Malayalis here? I'm sure there must be Malayali, how can we not have a Malayali here? So Kochivide is actually, if you're Tamil, Chinnavide, it's a concubine. Okay, so we said we will have both the houses in the same plot. So it's an outhouse actually. So that's the original house and that's the Kuch we did, right? So we said we will follow the same logic. We will have a shoebox plan. We'll have a shoebox plan and a red tile roof. Only the stilt was missing in this. So we kind of went about this design. The cube on top was shifted for views, privacy, and then it ended up, something like this. And I'll just go through the tiles. We got one of the best Mangalore tiles. I personally went to about 25, Mangalore tile factory, because today they don't make tile from clay. They actually make from clay powder. So it's recycled. So those tiles, if you just drop from like 2 inches away, they can crack. But this was one of the best tiles that we got. The next project is the title itself. It's an office, a small office, site office, which is around a tree. The cashew tree became the deciding factor in the project. So there was a small plot. It was a 32 villa development, and the first plot, was developed as a site office. So there was a beautiful cashew tree, which was this, and we want to sort of retain the cashew tree. And what came about was this. Since it's a small office, we kind of organized it from, public to private. It became a linear organization, wrapped around it, and then, decided on the organization, decided what can be open functions, what can be closed, and the plan. So the model kind of shows how it kind of starts, 7 feet, touches the ground, and kind of slowly raises up. At this point, it is 10, this is 10 feet, so 10 plus 3, so that's 13 feet from the ground. Kind of meanders around, and that's completely insignificant entry. That's the lightness of the structure. There's a sense of in and out. And this is the last segment, body of architecture. I'll start with courthouse. Some of these projects were finished in the last 2-3 years. So when we got a brief for this project, the brief was fairly simple. It said, it needed how it should feel was the charm of an ancestral courtyard house, and how it should be made is to kind of, sit lightly on earth, so that it's, it does not, use all the energy. So at that time, we were actually working on a project in Mylapore, which is actually the dense, temple settlement, again in Chennai. So, in fact, the project that we were building were actually built on an ancestral house, demolishing the ancestral house, and kind of rebuilt. And I used to see these sites every day. They were like one after the other demolished. We found out the bricks were cheaper. It's $2.50. The new brick is $5.50. So we thought, okay, fine. But someday I'm going to use the bricks. But what was interesting is also this kind of memory, kind of a, it's a kind of a memory of a void. There is a void in it, but at the same time, it kind of evokes a lot of memory. So we want to create this sort of spatial memory in the project that we wanted to do, and that's what we did. So we actually had a typical courtyard, a traditional typical courtyard, and we used the reclaimed bricks. So that's a typical courtyard. This is from Padmanabharam Palace, because the wife, was from Kerala. So we kind of used that as a way to kind of, that's a typical section of a courtyard. We kind of worked only with the section. We kind of, made the court rather linear and kind of, increase this section. So that section became the project. So this kind of spatial void kind of anchored the entire project together. And then came the most difficult part. How do you kind of find reclaimed bricks? We had no idea. We went around asking, so we decided on few demolition contractors. So it was a kind of painful 3-day process. So we had like brick warriors in office. Like there were 3 guys who would. So the first day morning, he'll get a call from a demolition contractor saying that we're going to demolish the house. Right? In less than 24 hours, you have to say yes so that he will sort that brick. So in that 24 hours, I had to kind of test the brick, check the compressive strength, and then tell him that, yes, we want these bricks, right? And then he sorts it and then loads it. This was like a roughly about, 48-hour process. And we did this for about 45 sites. Some of the bricks we found were more stronger than today's concrete, after 21 days of curing. Look at that, 21 Newton per meter square. That's the strength of concrete, actually, what we test, minimum strength. That's 28. So that's the courthouse. It's a suburban house, and these are all where the bricks come from, actually. So once we got the bricks, then it was simply just putting it together, do a beautiful brick coursing. So in fact, we did a whole set of drawings, fancy brick coursing and all. Then finally we decided the bricks were so beautiful. It was weathered. Each one was in different colors. So just retain that, keep it simple. Then, that went on, and then we did the drawings. And then that's how it turned out to be. So once we decided the exterior was going to be these reclaimed bricks, we said that we want the inside to be something else, not brick again. We want to create a world inside a world. That's the word we kept using. So we use this titanium plaster, which is actually almost like a red oxide, but which uses titanium oxide, which gives this lighter gray finish. And then that's how the place is finished. Very simple details with Z sections, industrial Z sections. I'm not sure if you get these anymore. The doors were reclaimed as well, teakwood doors. These were all old government doors. Like if you go, like you have this government grey paint, like PWD grey paint. Almost all of them are like fantastic quality teakwood doors. So we specially designed this stair, which was hinged on 1, 2, 3, and 4 spots. I'll move on to the next project. This is actually a project about sort of time and space. The previous one was more about memory, and this was more about time and space. So these two, I think, two very important, art personalities. One is Chandralekha. She hails from Gujarat, but actually she lived most of her life in Chennai. Dancer, choreographer. And Darshat Patel, who was founder secretary of NID. So they both, and they both were good Jews, ended up in Chennai and lived in this, sort of art community. They wanted to create an art community in Chennai. And it was like this. So this is so our design challenge was to develop a relationship with the existing. This is called a Chandra Mantapa. So you go in, the audience sits in the open air, and the theater is like, right at the back. So that is kind of completely covered. And this is a sunken Kalari pit. So it's a Kalari, performance place. So this was two sort of predominant spaces in Chennai. The place is called Spaces, and there are events happening here on a regular basis. And so that's the Chandra Mandapa, that's the open air theater, and that's the, stage. This is the Kalari area. And this is the building where we had to add a small archive for the works of these two artists. And they were meant to be, there was an additional challenge on the existing footprint as well. So they were actually, so you have two vernacular styles, and anything you put here, it's going to be obvious that it's a new structure, right? So first we solve the organization. One of the problem with archive is it's basically like a dark space. There's no spatial articulation. You want it to be boxed so that you can preserve the stuff in. So we added a small sort of pavilion, which is more like an office space. And, the place also needed some toilets, so we kind of made that more look like caves you kind of meander through. And one of the principles that sort of governed this project was the proposed structure should not be a generic brick plastered white box, although our budget only allowed for that. As an intervention, it should complement the sense of time embedded in this setting. The new addition invariably will reflect the current time. So we asked ourselves the question, can we create a sense of time that is abstract? So we want to kind of create something which people thought, something which existed here. Everything about it looks new, but it has a kind of an age to it. A bit of now and also, it's past. So if you kind of ignore the style, like if you see a ruin, you don't know what is the age of the ruin, right? But it's ruin and it's kind of in the process. There's a time embedded to it. So we thought, and if you look at some of the structures, what I showed, the vernacular structures, what express them is pure construction. So we said we want to make this entire building as an expression of pure construction. And the mold of concrete and the brick coursing became the entire project, so to say. What we did is, we made the concrete mold using the bamboo shuttering. We kind of worked on different options. I think once, so we made certain, so that sketch is kind of very instrumental. So you kind of use one bamboo piece like this, and you also use a small one like this to make sure the cement milk does not escape, so that the texture of the shutter finish is kind of carried forward. And then that became a sort of expression of the project. So today, if you walk into that place, you would wonder if this is something which existed here, as long as the place existed. And interestingly, these bricks, the story of this brick is like after we finished all those other courthouse brick, this contractor says, "Sir, I have 1.5 lakh bricks from one site." I said, "Okay, please bring it here. We will use it for this project." And that's how we had like this entire thing was, from a bungalow which is about 70 years old in T Nagar. And that's the pavilion. The floor is polished concrete. We work with limitations. All our projects work with extreme limitations. This is like a chipboard that they use for, in cargoes. And that's the toilets. And these two materials and the expression of these two materials became the sort of project itself. This is the last project. It's about the use of color as an organizer of space. This is how we got the site. It's an interior project. What was once a traditional courtyard house, over time and generations, with many ad hoc changes. So this column, so this was actually the courtyard, right? This is the old column. So they actually put 4 columns and then put a roof above. So at one point, the place, became unfit for human habitation. They were using it as a warehouse. And that's how we got the site. So the client had a limited budget and wanted to convert that into kids' activity center. So we said, with this budget, I can fix the walls, make larger openings to allow more light in, and paint the surface. That's all. And we kind of stuck to painting through the entire project. So what was interesting is, we kind of teased out the organization which was not visible, in the site earlier through color. So once we decided we were going to paint it, we knew it's going to be cold, so we kind of called up a friend who was a graphic designer to add some, graphic content that will make the place livable. The lighting, again, another friend, Dan Flavian inspired lighting which uses fluorescent lamps, were employed to kind of create, build this whole space together. I started my presentation with the note that saying that we do not have a homogeneous ideology. As you must have seen, our ideas are tempered by the context in which we operate. In all this, our search is for the beauty in the pragmatic, and that's all we try to sort of look for, because we don't really decide anything in the process of doing a project. And I would like to leave you with this slide. Thank you so much. Thanks.
Thanks, Mahesh, for that wonderful presentation. At the moment, I don't have much questions, but one point that I wanted to add is that although you say that there's no homogeneous kind of ideology, but what is interesting is that there's a slow manifesto that kind of seems to be evolving over a period of time, with more and more public projects to engage with, and this whole idea of working with the city, but in different ways. Like you're constantly somehow watching the city, what is being broken down, what is being constructed, where are the kind of climate is being affected, or and where is the public missing, and somehow you kind of find yourself in those places and make the best out of that situation. And I think that's quite interesting in that sense. With that note, I would see if Rupali or anybody has any questions, or anybody from the audience.
Hi. Two questions. A small one. I was really fascinated about the way you used bamboo as a shuttering for concrete, but I didn't clearly understand how you did that. Like you used 3 parts of bamboos. Can you just explain once more, like how you created that shuttering?
Let me just go back to that slide. Okay, so that's a typical shuttering board, which is a ply board, right? On top of it, you mount the bamboo. Okay, and there is another piece here at the bottom which kind of holds that cement mill. The moment this is not there, your edges keep chipping off by the time you remove the shuttering. So this is to kind of take care, when the de-shuttering happens, the concrete at the edge, is kind of cured fully. So that's that's how it is made, and you have to kind of select the bamboo. So you see he's kind of nailing the bamboo strips onto the ply board. So this is the ply board actually, and they're kind of bolted. They're kind of raised. So each lift is about 2 feet, because that's the sort of workable size. So every day they would come, not every day actually, once in a week, they would come and pour 2 feet of concrete, and then lift the same thing to the next level. So and that's how it kind of goes. Yeah.
And another related to the first project about the schools you did, you started out by saying that these children, they were of a low strata, and apart from some of the teachers, most of them looked down on them. So the modifications you did to the school structure, it would really help them for the students' confidence to boost or anything. But how will that take care of the teacher's mindset or anything? Like, do you have any?
See, I think it's a larger problem. Like even teachers, they don't have a space for themselves. So you actually provide that. You kind of take them seriously to start with, and then make their engagement with the students. So as part of the project, every school actually has a teacher room. Every school, where the teachers can gather, if they have a birthday or if they just want to discuss. I mean, typical government school works. Actually, it doesn't work. It's just people just assemble there There are like tables all over the place. Funds keep coming in from different directions. They always are answerable to the commissioner. So I mean, most of these teachers do not even have freedom to kind of think on their own. So, but still, in spite of that, many of these schools actually, give good results, which means there are a few dedicated teachers who are actually, working on the ground. I mean, you can look at many stories. I think, every 12th and every 10th result on that day, you will actually hear stories how teachers help them to kind of, move up the ladder. So teachers, we also provide facilities for the teachers, and some of the spaces what you saw at the ground level, all the shared spaces and multi-use spaces, is primarily for these teachers to kind of engage with the students. So that's when they kind of come together. As a school, currently they don't really have any kind of closeness. There is no kind of, they don't claim that space. They come under that grilled box and they go out. So what is out is actually a playground, and then the next out is the city. So it's kind of these hard boundaries is what we want to kind of break.
Thank you.
Hello. I'd like to start by saying that it was a really interesting presentation. Throughout, I was trying to, the moment you would explain the site and the client's expectation in my mind, I was trying to think, acha, isme kya kara hoga? What could they have done? And the only one I could get right was actually the office around the tree. So, which brings me to my question. Could you talk a little bit about the process that you take? I mean, when you're sitting in the office, what is the process that you follow, and how much time does it take? Time for me is the most important part of this question. And what path do you go through? Because I don't know. Of course, it was a very short span, but a lot of them were like unpredictable. I mean, I was like, how could they have landed here? So, could you just?
Okay. See, what we do is when we get a brief, we actually don't start designing. We actually start putting everything that makes the project. And in fact, in one of the school that I work with, CARE, we actually have a studio called Ugly Design Studio. Okay, so the first cut is you kind of put all the essentials that make a project. And in many cases, it actually looks ugly. For example, I'll give you an example. If you take a one ground property, which is roughly about 2,400 square foot, you apply parking, you apply Vastu, you apply all the bylaws, you will get the same product again and again and again. The cookie cutter model will keep repeating. So we kind of get that first, like be it a high-rise residential or however small the project is, we kind of do that. So once you do that, that from there, anything you go, you can actually always come back to it. So you kind of, it's at the back of your mind. So we always do that. And then I am very lazy. Okay. So what I do is I actually, in fact, in my office, even the interns kind of take up the first bit of the work. So I ask one person to kind of look at all the bylaws. I ask another person, study what all the heights and sections we can do, and look at. So different people take different in charge. But I deliberately do that because I would like to keep the design objective till the very end. I do not want to be engaged with that. Most of the time, what happens is as architects and designers, we kind of hallucinate over our work. We think it's too good actually, and we're kind of blinded and prejudiced, I would say, because you're an architect, you have a certain way of thinking. So I always keep, like, even models we do in different scales, because like there's a Tamil saying, panni kutti kuda, chinnadula alagada irukonu. Like even a piglet is beautiful when it is a, kid, when it is a piglet, right? So everything has to do with scale, all the fundamentals of architecture, proportion. So we kind of work in that sense. So at one point so that is one, which is keeping it objective, and two is keeping it extremely subjective to the client. I wouldn't have got this paint thing done if the client said, my budget is only so much. That's the starting point. So you kind of really listen to the client, and they're very happy once you give them what they want, right? I mean, there's no questions asked there. So I think the subjectivity is the clients in most of the cases. The objectivity is the parameters that governs the project. And you kind of bring in, I mean, like what, Shyam just said, there's a gaze about things around you. You constantly kind of are engaged, be it the movies or the city that surrounds you, the politics that's happening around you. I think there is that, that sort of passive gaze. And when there is an opportunity for a project, it kind of props up. Like, I'll give you an example how that is. Like the book building project where you saw the grills. No, actually, it was not designed for that project. It was actually designed for another small school in Theosophical Society, which didn't have fund. So they had these old jalis, which were actually, breaking away. So they said, can you give us some proposal to kind of do that project? So we said, you get these second-hand, window frames with fancy grills. So that's when it started. So you put a collage of grills. It creates both vibrancy and also kind of, creates a completely new atmosphere for the kids. So it actually started there. The project never took off. And this client just happened to come at the right time. So I think every project, we kind of, like for us, every project is not the end of an idea. It's actually beginning of an idea. So in every one of these projects, I can actually give you 10 different ways in which we have approached it. And that can themselves become a project. So we kind of take extreme caution to document, and the entire process. And that's a learning for us. I mean, there has been miserable failures as well. I mean, there are certain nightmare projects that, that has happened, but they kind of learn you to keep you, on your toes. Yeah.
My next question is quite a silly one. In the house with the courtyard where you shifted it in order to create a different volume. So when you do that, when that happens, how do they clean? Like, how does the general cleaning happen?
Cleaning, yeah, that's a problem with most of our work, actually. No, actually, I don't know. In fact, the house, I think now this is like second season. So we're going to actually do one cleaning and do a coat of, transparent PU. So let's see. I mean, they have not complained as yet. So.
Hi. Can you on your retail project? Can you throw some light on the materiality of that project?
Sorry, can you?
Can you tell what was the material used in your retail project where there was the retail shops project?
Yeah. So which one you're talking about?
The first
one. Yeah. Shop in a park.
Yeah. And also, there was a brief that you need to keep a specific open space around. So how did you? I mean, I did not understand how did you do it?
Okay, I'll just quickly go back to that. Okay, so the original plan of the client was to actually do like a strip mall, which kind of spans from here to here. Okay. And have a atrium somewhere here, and then have the circulation like this. Since this is on an aquifer recharge area, which means what they have said is you can't have a building which is more than 3,000 square foot. That's the rule in Chennai. So basically what they're saying is you have smaller plots, smaller footprint, even on a larger plot. So, but they also specify what should be the minimum size of the plot, which is this. So that's the minimum size of the plot. You can't go less than this. In this, my building is somewhere here, actually. Right? So 60% is open, only 40% is ground coverage. So that the moment that rule applied, you actually end up having these setbacks free. And that was the problem to tackle. And that's what we tried to do with the shop in a park, where we tried to connect them with like single canopy so that you perceive it as one space, and that is what we try to bring to the table. This is what it is. So you see this. So this is the setback. So after the setback line, this is what happens. Yeah, and there is a 5-meter setback in front, 2-meter setback on all sides, and that is the plot line. If I draw it somewhere here, actually.
The spaces in between two plots, that also is a concretized area.
Yeah, it is. It is partly.
So, like, if I'm not wrong, for the aquifer recharge, shouldn't it not be concretified?
Basically, what we've done is paver blocks, right? So paver blocks can seep in, so that it's on a sand bed, so it can kind of seep in. So that's the detail.
So when you take up social projects like Ullur Kuppam, the first project, then there's no like you said, you guys as designers choose which.
Yes.
How does that take place? Like, what is your priority when you're choosing something? And because you'll have to wage a long battle, correct, with so many authorities. So, as a firm, as a collective, how do you take your projects up? Is it based on simplicity or is it priorities? I think
there's a kind of slight background to it. Actually, initially when we started our practice, we did a lot of top-down projects in the sense that we worked with NGOs who actually directly work with the commissioners, with either industrial bodies or whatever. So this is a kind of bottom-up. So initially we did a lot of work at a top-down level, right? And what happened is even at that time, in fact, there is one project on our website, you can see public spaces on water edge, where we tried to say that, if you develop all the water bodies, edges of water bodies in Chennai, you can get, 300 marina beaches, right? I mean, theoretically speaking, right? So you can develop them into like a neighborhood water body, waterfront development, and so on. So in fact, we gave a demonstration of 3 such cases. One is at the neighborhood level, one is an ecologically sort of sensitive area, and one at a city level, cultural level. And what we found is people stole our idea, right? In the sense that, so you are actually only initiating these projects. Somebody makes up an RFP, in front of you, they say that, this will never happen because, the land is owned by Fisheries Department. This is owned by them, so we can't, do that. And after 6 months, there is an RFP for the project and an architect is doing that work. So we got really pissed and we said, we're not engaging in that kind of practice anymore. We want to kind of work instead. We would rather, because, it's not, half of the project were also pro bono in some sense. You wanted to create change, but you thought that would be beneficial. But then we kind of stepped back. Now we are kind of very cautious how we want to work. So this particular group, this Saravanan and Urur Kuppam, most of the TM Krishna videos, the Porambok song, all these things, actually this guy is an extremely they're activist, they're there everywhere, right from, anti-CA to, whatnot. So it's really, fascinating to kind of work with people who are passionate and see how your sort of skills and abilities can, improve their cause. So we are pretty much at the background always.
Just one remark, just adding to Vibha's thing. I actually wanted to go back to the idea of the foreground and the background of architecture practices. I mean, although that has its limitations, I was thinking actually most, government projects are done by architects who are truly in the background. Like they're not worried about which magazine will publish them or Instagram and all. They're going by their routine every day. Truly the background architects. It's not the categories that Prem would kind of identify with. But there is a sudden interest in many architects across India. Also thinking of Biju's practice. We have many in Bombay in the recent competition for street designs in Bombay, and then several of these young studios suddenly kind of coming into the challenge of designing streets and urban designs, urban spaces and stuff. What do you think made you particularly interested to come and situate in such practice again? Working with the municipal corporation or with any local bodies for that matter.
I mean, I think like any architectural practice, I think you kind of thrive in private realm. I mean, it's given for a city like Chennai. We actually don't have an urban design practice. There is no urban design studio in Chennai. I mean that's crazy. So on one end is there's this lack of enough people doing work at the city level. Personally, for us is I think it's an effect to change. I think for our studio, I think that has been the sort of way in which we approach these projects. If we can actually effect a change through your discipline, I think that's the best thing that can happen, and that has been the motivation for us. And the third part is, I think there is now more money in the government's coffer doing these projects than actually private. So that's also there. I mean, look at our cities. You have to go through a compound, and then you have fancy, you have picked this from marble from there and this. And what's the point? If you can't step out, So I think that is a kind of a very important, space that we want to explore, and also we want to take claim also, because right now, an urban designer from elsewhere can come and operate, but honestly, we know the cultural, status quo, and we can bring in something that people from outside cannot. So I think we also proudly take that claim when we work on these projects.
Just to add a further question to that, do you think there's an increasing interest from several government bodies in the idea of getting something designed versus just executing a project? Earlier, like, so you kind of get the cheapest tender project and get it flushed out. There seems to be more and more increasing interest in the design thing. So do you think is it a shift in that kind of perception?
For Chennai, I can say yes, because that's a kind of a hard work that a lot of NGOs have put in for the last decade or so. Right from capacity building to making them aware, better urban practices, sustainable urban practices. So there is a lot of effort that has gone in, and I think now, at least, there is a kind of an informed group which wants to change things. And yes, you are in the right time to kind of tag along and see some change happen. Definitely, there is a kind of positive shift from the time I started my studio in Chennai to now.
Thank you, Mahesh, for this really interesting presentation. I have two. One is a comment and one is a question. The first comment is that when I see this idea of working with bylaws, and it's very close to the Dutch practices in that sense, hardcore bylaw working and then rethinking typologies. But I think what is interesting and where it actually transcends that is the poetics of the artisanal, right? Like with the way you actually work it out. So I think it's interesting, and somebody needs to kind of look at these practices, because I don't think we are talking, very much about this kind of way of working. But I think the second question is, again, to sort of look at this idea. You have mode, you have CAF, all of these here, and also your own practice of working with bylaws. Is there a kind of push by the collective to, in some ways, rethink these bylaws, or push the government to actually sort of rethink something on the urban design scale where poetics comes back into the city?
At a public realm scale, I think it's happening in some sense. I think like some of the latest tender bids, so they actually had very interesting and pertinent set of rules that need to be followed while you design public realm. When it comes to bylaws that govern the sort of development of a city, I think that's a stronghold of developers, and I think developers and your politicians kind of really work. That nexus is something we need to kind of engage with in some sense, but I don't think we have actually seen any change from that front. The latest you have one bylaw across the country. That's kind of ridiculous. So there are actually IIA bodies which has actually gone to court saying that it cannot happen. So there are people fighting this battle at many different levels. That's what is happening. And we have not yet seen. I think we need to accept that at some level the market has taken over. And I think, like Shop in a Park, if we can actually put a spin to the whole thing and actually show, yes, you can still do, poetics with the market in mind, I think that's where some innovation need to happen. You need some guinea pigs to kind of fund those projects. Yeah.
Any other questions or comments? No.
How do you factor in time, not just when you're working on public projects like the first one, but also when it comes to the experimenting with bricks? Like, for example, we have our thesis going on and we have very little time, okay? So when we have to think of materials and methods and all that, all of us want to do something that we really put our heart and soul into it and all that. How do you factor in time? How much time would you take, like on an average? Won't the client badger you after a point if you're spending time as a brick by brick?
Okay, we have been fairly lucky.
I don't mean to be rude. I'm just asking.
No, it's okay. Yeah. So I think we've been fairly lucky to actually, in fact, my first project I've never built in Chennai. Chennai was the last place I want to start my practice, but accident has it that I am in Chennai and I'm just loving it. So my first client, he was also doing the first project, like it's a startup, and that was also my first project. So when I proposed some fancy ideas, all that he asked me, can you build it? I'm with you if you can build it. And I've seen that across clients. If they know that you can actually do it, they will give that time. That's the way that I have seen, because in the Indian context, making a building is like we spend 90% of our time making a building and 10% actually designing. So a lot of things is on the fly. On the fly, you kind of wait for the right opportunity and kind of say let's do it. So we do spend 90% of time actually in making a building. So that's why, just to add on, that's why initially our objective goals of a project are very light, so that it can take any shape or form. So you start seeing possibilities as the project emerges. Yeah. So as the project emerges, that's what it is.
And our clients open to ideas like
Yes.
concrete
Yes.
flooring.
Yes.
We have a question from one of our Facebook Live viewers.
Wow.
Mukundan Rangarajan says, hello sir, from the presentation I could infer that responding to context is your design grammar. My question is, how do you kind of extract the design language from the context of your sites and implement onto your design? As most of the people don't want to build traditional structures now, how do you implement the tradition onto your design?
I don't know if it's tradition. I mean, we want to respond to time. So I think that's something that we, like if you build it today, it has to kind of stand, for what today's values is. When we work, like even the courthouse, we knew that the, client wanted a court, but we tried to kind of, put a spin to it and see how you can kind of, in today's context, can you create a completely new language? Can you create a completely new space that is, up to today's time? So yeah, I mean, I think context is also bigger context. You're also informed by so many things around. It's not the physical context, but actually like completely new set of materials which are there. There are like fantastic work happening around. So I think all these information today sets, the idea of a context is a bit more loose, I would say, in that sense. But I think when it manifests is when you kind of anchor it to a place. And I think that is the role that we think, we play. We consciously also are critical about it when we do it. Yeah.
I just remembered an anecdote that Kishore had shared with me about the courtyard house.
Okay.
That the municipal representatives would come asking for property tax, and they would see an unfinished building and kind of collect a lower tax or something like that. Now, if you get some strange anecdote, it had.
See, the thing is, there are certain sort of conventions. When you apply for a loan, so the first stage is foundation, second stage is slab, third stage is this. And when the project comes to finishing, it has to be plastered and door frames have to be put. In all our projects, we have a problem. The last stage of money that the client never gets. Because he says, either it's not plastered, or if you use aluminum frames, it comes in the last. So there's no frame. So in most of our projects, that is the case. So, yeah, I guess you'll have to live with it.
If there are no further questions, then I would like to thank Mahesh for taking your
Thanks
time,
so
and
much.
thanks everyone for patiently listening to the lecture, and see you in the next CCT event. We'll update on Facebook. Thank you.